It is that time of year again. Red tide is starting to show up in backgrounds to very low concentrations in 20 samples along southwest Florida's coastline. Let me show you here on the map. This is just off of Sarasota County. You can see backgrounds of very low concentrations right around Sarasota down into the Venice area. And we've even picked up background concentrations right around the mouth of Charlotte Harbor. Now, we haven't seen it further south down into Lee and Collier County, but it is something we're going to continue to watch, and it's not unusual for October to see these levels but have no impact of wildlife or human health. That said, we are watching this closely, especially given the state of Lake Okeechobee and the threat for high volume releases.
We know that those lake releases, if and when they start, have an exacerbating effect on red tide. We were really nervous for what that could mean for the future.
Lake O and red tide, a tale as long as time, but with the lake currently at 16.25 feet, decisions on releases might have to be made soon.
It will get to a certain point where it cannot safely be stored, and rather than putting any of the communities south of the lake at risk, they will release that water.
When the lake reaches greater than 16.5 feet, the integrity of the Herbert Hoover Dike could be threatened. That's what worries SCCF's Matt DePaulis.
And when we see those massive releases coming down the Caloosahatchee, entering the estuary, and we have an already active red tide, we can expect that red tide to get much worse.
But when we hit 16.5 feet, doesn't automatically mean releases, as Colonel James Booth told Fox 4 in August.
If we see that the lake crest at 16.5, I would likely say, hey, I'm comfortable, or we'll just hold with beneficial releases and try to bring that down.
And the threat of continued high lake levels comes from the forecast of a coming El Nino, which historically brings a wetter winter for Florida, which was reflected in Thursday's NOAA winter outlook.
There's not going to be a lot of opportunities to draw down that lake without some of these massive releases.
But if the Army Corps does have to release, the nutrient loading down the Caloosahatchee could make an active red tide even worse. That said, Dr. Mike Parsons with FGCU's Water School says it will be a challenge for red tide to access those nutrients.
But red tide can't handle that low salinity water. So there's a buffer between directly accessing those nutrients and having it mix enough with the Gulf water so the water still is salty enough that red tide can grow.
Still, Parson agrees those releases are possible.
With the El Nino, potential cold fronts and the rainfall, that could cause some high discharges. We saw that in 2016, for example, and that caused such an outrage that Captains for Clean Water formed.
Question mark in all of this is how much rain do we get, and is that rain enough to put the lake into those dangerous levels? Also, is the red tide getting to the point that it would be exacerbated by any releases? In studio, meteorologist Andrew Shipley, Fox 4.